Ethan Hawthorne took a slow sip of his morning coffee, enjoying the quiet serenity of his farm. The golden sun had barely crept over the horizon, casting a soft glow over his land. He exhaled, savoring the moment, until he heard the buzzing. At first he brushed it off. Probably a wasp, or maybe just the wind rattling something loose. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A sleek black drone, hovering just above his backyard like some mechanical predator. It moved with calculated precision, its tiny camera lens tilting downward, fixating on him. Ethan's grip on his coffee mug tightened. He wasn't scared, far from it. His blood boiled with quiet fury because he knew exactly who was behind this. Karen Whitmore. For years, that woman had made it her personal mission to make his life miserable. She was the self-appointed dictator of the HOA, obsessed with rules, regulations, and, above all, control. But Ethan's farm sat just outside her jurisdiction, a stubborn patch of land she couldn't regulate. That fact drove her mad. She had tried everything: bogus fines, formal complaints, even reporting his sky strikers, a squadron of fiercely territorial geese as dangerous animals. But now, spying? That was a new low. The drone dipped lower, scanning his property like it was gathering intelligence for an invasion. Ethan's patience snapped. He grabbed the nearest object, a worn-out slipper, and hurled it at the drone. It swerved effortlessly, dodging the attack like some smug little machine with an attitude. The commotion caught the attention of Captain Beekman, his most aggressive gander. From across the yard, the bird let out a sharp, warning hiss, his dark eyes locking onto the intruder. Within seconds, the rest of the sky strikers were on high alert, necks craning, beady eyes tracking the foreign object with laser focus. Ethan took a slow step back. If Karen was spying, it meant she was hunting for a reason to escalate. She wasn't just nosy, she was dangerous. But she had underestimated him. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. If Karen wanted a war, she had just fired the first shot. And Ethan? He never lost a fight on his own land. Ethan Hawthorne stormed across the street, his boots crunching against the pavement as he marched. Toward Karen Whitmore's pristine, overly manicured front lawn, everything about her house screamed control. From the meticulously trimmed hedges to the American flag snapping in the breeze like it, too, disapproved of his existence. He didn't bother knocking. Instead, he pounded on the door, his jaw tight with restrained fury. Moments later, it swung open, revealing Karen standing there, arms crossed, lips curled into that signature smirk of hers. "Well, what a surprise," she drawled, her voice dripping with false politeness. "What can I do for you, Ethan?" He pointed a firm finger back toward his farm. "Cut the act, Karen. Call off your drone." She blinked, feigning innocence. "Drone? I have no idea what you're talking about." From behind her, a tired voice groaned. Rick Whitmore, her husband, shuffled into view, rubbing his temples like a man who had long since stopped fighting. Battles he knew he'd never win. "Karen, just admit it," he muttered. "You've been flying that stupid thing over his farm all week." Karen's jaw twitched, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. "Rick, shut up." Ethan took a deliberate step forward. "No, let him talk." Rick sighed, lifting his hands in surrender. "She bought that thing last month. Said it was for neighborhood security. But let's be real, she's been using it to snoop on everyone. It's got night vision, a high-resolution camera, and a notebook full of observations about who's doing what on their property." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "So what exactly were you looking for, Karen?" His voice was low, controlled, but laced with menace. "Trying to report my geese again? Hoping to find some violation to use against me?" Karen's smirk returned, sharper this time. "Your geese are a menace. And let's not pretend you're some innocent farmer, just living off the land. Your property is unregulated. It's an eyesore. It brings down home values." There it was, the truth. This was never about rules, laws, or safety. This was about control. She couldn't stand that Ethan existed outside her authority. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "You're unbelievable." Karen leaned in slightly, voice dripping with smug confidence. "Oh, please. What are you going to do about it? Report me to the HOA? She grinned. I am the HOA. That was the moment Ethan knew. This wouldn't be settled with words. Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought she had already won. She was dead wrong. Ethan Hawthorne leaned against the wooden fence of his farm, arms crossed, watching Captain Beekman and the rest of the Sky Strikers glide across the pond. They were calm, for now, but earlier, when Karen's drone had invaded their airspace, they had reacted like soldiers sensing an enemy on the horizon. A slow smirk formed on Ethan's lips. Karen had made a mistake. She thought she could use technology to dominate him, thought she could win this war with machines. But she had underestimated the raw, chaotic power of nature. And Ethan was about to prove it. He needed a countermeasure, something that could strike back against Karen's airborne surveillance. And what better weapon than the very creatures she had tried to outlaw? Geese were territorial, aggressive, and, most importantly, smart. They didn't just react, they adapted. And with the right training, they could become something far more than just livestock. They could become weapons. Ethan wasted no time. He dusted off an old RC helicopter from his barn, something he'd bought years ago as a hobby, but never got around to using. Now, it was about to serve a far greater purpose. At first, the Sky Strikers merely watched as the small aircraft buzzed through the air. Then, Ethan dangled a treat from its base and sent it flying across the yard. That got their attention. Captain Beekman was the first to react, his eyes narrowing as he tracked the moving target. With a loud honk, he launched himself into the air, wings flapping furiously. He missed by mere inches, landing with an undignified splash in the pond. Ethan chuckled, but quickly adjusted the training method. Precision was key. He introduced a laser pointer, using it to guide their attacks. He conditioned them to respond instantly to the red dot, associating it with a direct order to strike. Day by day, their instincts sharpened. The Sky Strikers learned patterns, adapted to flight trajectories, and attacked with surgical precision. They weren't just defending their territory anymore. They were preparing for war. And when Karen's drone returned, it wouldn't just be an inconvenience. It would be prey. The afternoon sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows over Ethan Hawthorne's farm. He stood in the middle of the yard, feeling the tension in the air. The Sky Strikers, his elite flock of geese, were on alert, heads tilted toward the sky, eyes scanning the clouds for any sign of trouble. And then it came, the unmistakable buzz of Karen's drone, hovering just beyond the tree line. It had returned. Ethan glanced at Captain Beekman, who stood at the front of the flock, the alpha gander. With a single sharp honk, he launched himself into the air, flapping his wings with a force that sent the rest of the geese into motion. The Sky Strikers weren't just reacting. They were coordinating, executing the perfect aerial maneuver they'd been trained for. The drone, sleek and silent, tried to dodge, its rotors whirring with increased speed. But it was no match for the geese. Captain Beekman swooped in, aiming for the drone's exposed side. He struck hard, his beak slamming into one of the drone's propellers with a deafening crack. The drone faltered, struggling to stay airborne, but it was already too late. The geese were relentless. One after another, they attacked from every direction, each of them focusing on a different target. A sharp beak pierced the camera lens, rendering the high-tech device useless. Another goose took a swipe at the sensitive sensors beneath the drone, sending sparks flying. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched. His strategy was working. This was no longer about just defending his farm. This was about sending a message. Karen had underestimated him, and now her drone was about to pay the price. With a final, decisive honk, Captain Beekman delivered the killing blow. The drone plummeted from the sky, crashing into the pond with a splash, its once majestic frame now reduced to a useless heap of twisted metal. Ethan let out a satisfied breath. His geese had done their job, but before he could savor the victory, he heard it, Karen's shrill scream echoing from across the fence. "You'll pay for this!" she shouted, fury in her eyes. Ethan turned slowly, meeting her gaze with an unwavering smirk. "Guess you'll need a new toy, Karen." Her face turned bright red. her fists clenched in rage. She was seething, but Ethan was already thinking ahead. This was just the beginning. And this war was far from over. The next morning, Ethan stood by the fence, watching his sky strikers march around the yard in formation. The sense of victory from the previous day still lingered. But deep down, he knew that Karen would not back down easily. She wasn't the type to give up. Sure enough, just as he started feeling the calm of success, the silence was shattered. A sheriff's deputy pulled into the driveway, the rumble of the patrol car cutting through the peace like a knife. Ethan's gaze hardened as the officer stepped out of the car. "You the owner of this property?" the officer asked, flipping open his notepad. Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans, stepping forward with a cautious but steady demeanor. "Yeah, what's this about?" The deputy sighed, rubbing his face with a tired hand. "We got a complaint. Your geese are being classified as dangerous animals. I was asked to investigate." Ethan's blood ran cold for a moment, but only for a second. Karen, of course. She had to be behind this. He forced a tight smile, reining in his anger. "Dangerous? You're kidding, right?" The deputy didn't crack a smile. "I wish I was. The report claims your geese attacked and destroyed private property, a drone specifically." Ethan chuckled darkly. "Let me guess. Karen Whitmore filed the complaint?" The deputy's eyes didn't shift, but Ethan caught the slightest twitch of his lips. "Can't say who filed it, but I wasn't shocked when I read the name." Ethan's fists clenched. This wasn't a simple complaint. It was a last-ditch effort from Karen to destroy his livelihood. He took a deep breath, his voice low but firm. "Look, officer, the drone was spying on my property, plain and simple. I have every right to defend my land. My geese did exactly what they were supposed to do. Protect it. They're not dangerous animals. They're territorial. There's a big difference." The deputy nodded, seemingly understanding. "Yeah, I figured. But here's the thing. Karen's pushing for an official investigation. If she succeeds, the county might send someone to assess whether your animals are a public safety concern." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You've got to be kidding me." "Sorry, but you know how these HOA types work. They make enough noise, and people listen," the deputy said, tearing a page from his notepad and handing it to him. "For now, just consider this a warning." As the deputy left, Ethan looked at his geese. Sergeant Beekman stared back at him, tilting his head slightly, as if awaiting his orders. Ethan felt the fire ignite in him once more. This was far from over. Karen had crossed a line, and Ethan was ready to fight back. No one messed with his farm and got away with it. The next phase of the battle had just begun. Ethan Hawthorne's pulse quickened as he heard the unmistakable hum of not one, but 3 drones slicing through the air. The sound was heavier this time, more menacing, closer. Karen had gone all out. Standing tall in the middle of his yard, Ethan felt his heart race. But there was no panic, no hesitation. He had prepared for this moment. The Sky Strikers, led by Captain Beekman, were already on edge, ready to act. The drones circled above his property in perfect formation, a dangerous fleet of mechanical predators, each one scanning the land like vultures. Ethan stood motionless for a beat, watching them. This wasn't just about Karen asserting her control. This was personal. She was no longer content with spying. She wanted revenge, and she had invested in military-grade technology to ensure it. "Now, Sky Strikers!" Ethan shouted, his voice cutting through the tension in the air. The signal was given. With a battle cry, Captain Beekman was the first to soar into the sky, his wings beating against the air like a war drum. The other geese followed, their movements synchronized, as if they had become a flying army, not just a flock. The drones reacted, swerving sharply to avoid the incoming assault. Their sensors blinked, attempting to adjust, but the geese were faster. One of the drones dipped low, narrowly escaping a beak aimed for its rotor. Another was hit from the side, a goose knocking into its side and causing it to veer off course. Ethan's heart raced, his eyes following the action as the battle unfolded above him. The drones were fast, quicker than he had anticipated, but the Sky Strikers were fierce, and the drones were no match for their relentless fury. One by one, the drones fell from the sky, Their once advanced systems now nothing more than wasted metal and plastic. A final collision, a resounding crash, and the third drone plummeted to the ground, its shattered frame crashing into the dirt. The battle was won, but Ethan wasn't done yet. Karen was still out there, and she would never let this go. From the other side of the fence, he heard a furious scream, a shout of frustration. Ethan turned slowly, locking eyes with Karen, her face contorted in rage, her fists clenched in defeat. "You think this is funny?" she screamed. Ethan's lips curled into a calm, satisfied grin. "No, Karen," he said, his voice dripping with finality. "I think this is just the beginning." He turned back to his geese, who proudly strutted across the yard, victorious. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over, and Ethan was ready. 2 days after Ethan's victory, the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. He could feel it in the air, the calm before the storm. His geese strutted around the yard proudly, their heads high, as if they knew what they'd accomplished. The war had only just begun, and Karen Whitmore, the self-appointed queen of HOA, wasn't going to let a group of geese and their stubborn owner stand in her way. Ethan stood by the fence, watching the geese, when suddenly, a commotion stirred at the end of the driveway. He turned to see a car full of HOA members pulling up. They were here for business, and it wasn't good. He squared his shoulders, ready for whatever was coming. Minutes later, the HOA tribunal, a group of senior members who had always kowtowed to Karen, filed into his yard. Their expressions were grim, but it was clear they had been pressured into action. Karen had lost control. The meeting didn't take long. A vote was held, and within minutes, Karen Whitmore was no longer the president of the HOA. Ethan couldn't help but feel a small measure of satisfaction, watching the women and men who had been too frightened to stand up to Karen, now silently side with him. The tables had turned. The once formidable leader had fallen. Standing tall in the yard, Ethan met Karen's furious gaze. Her face was twisted in rage and disbelief as she gathered up her belongings in the back of her car, fury in her eyes. "This isn't over," she spat, her words venomous. Ethan stood tall, unshaken. "It is for you, Karen. You lost." His voice was calm, but there was a satisfaction in his words that couldn't be denied. As Karen slammed the trunk of her car shut, her last desperate glare was filled with defeat. Her grip on power was gone, and Ethan knew that the HOA and his farm were no longer under her thumb. As she drove off, Ethan exhaled, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders. The war was over, for now at least. But knowing Karen, it wasn't the last battle. The sky strikers flapped their wings behind him, as if to remind him that, no matter what came next, they were ready for anything. The victory was sweet, but Ethan knew it wouldn't last long. Karen Whitmore wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. Just 2 days after the HOA removed her from power, the storm she was brewing finally arrived. Ethan was working on a section of the fence when he heard the unmistakable hum of a drone, but this time, it wasn't one. It was a fleet, and they were circling above his farm like vultures. 3 of them, all armed with advanced surveillance equipment, their dark shapes blocking out the sun as they moved in synchrony. Ethan's stomach tightened. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was war. He had seen this coming. Karen was determined to win, no matter the cost. And now, armed with military-grade drones, she was going to finish what she had started. But Ethan wasn't about to let her. Not now, not ever. His mind raced as he sprinted toward the barn. He didn't have time to think, only act. The Sky Strikers, his army of geese, had been trained for this moment. They were ready. "Sky Strikers!" Ethan shouted as he lifted the laser pointer into the air. The geese sprang into action, their wings flapping with fury. Captain Beekman led the charge, his eyes locked on the incoming drones. The battle was on. The drones swerved and dodged in midair, their advanced flight systems trying to outmaneuver the relentless geese. But the Sky Strikers were faster, more chaotic, and they had one thing the drones didn't: pure instinct. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he watched Captain Beekman strike the first blow, his beak sinking into the drone's rotor with a loud snap. The drone wobbled, faltering in the sky, and then crashed to the ground with a thundering crash. But the other two drones were still attacking, circling tighter, trying to overwhelm the geese. The Sky Strikers held their ground, diving at the remaining drones with laser focus, knocking them down one by one. The battle raged on, but Ethan could feel the tide turning. With one final coordinated strike, Captain Beekman landed the killing blow on the last drone, sending it spiraling to the ground in a fiery wreck. The field was silent. The war was won. Ethan stood, breathing heavily, sweat dripping down his face, but the victory was undeniable. From the other side of the fence, Karen's furious scream echoed. Ethan turned to face her, his expression calm but full of resolve. "You think this is over?" she screeched, her face red with rage. Ethan's smile was the picture of calm satisfaction. "Oh, Karen, it's just begun." And with that, he turned, his geese following proudly behind him. Ethan stood at the edge of his property, watching his geese march proudly around the yard. The feeling of victory still lingered in the air, though he knew better than to relax. Karen Whitmore had been defeated, for now. But even as he watched his Sky Strikers, led by Captain Beekman, parade around like the heroes they were, Ethan could feel the tension in the air. Karen was relentless, and there was no way she'd just walk away quietly. As if on cue, the sound of an engine broke the silence. A car pulled into the driveway, its tires kicking up gravel as it slowed to a stop. Ethan's heart skipped a beat when he saw the familiar HOA vehicles. He could feel the weight of his past battles with them, the weight of knowing this wasn't truly over. The HOA tribunal, the same board members who had once stood by and let Karen push her agenda, now walked onto his land, their faces a mix of discomfort and reluctant determination. Ethan stood still, but inside, his muscles tensed. The meeting didn't take long. The words were sharp and to the point, a unanimous vote. Karen Whitmore was no longer president of the HOA. It was over. Ethan's breath caught for a moment as he watched Karen's fury explode. She had always believed she was untouchable, and now she was stripped of her power. Her red face, clenched fists, and defiant glare as she loaded her belongings into the back of her car were enough to tell Ethan all he needed to know. Karen was not one to accept defeat gracefully. "This isn't over," she spat, her voice full of venom. Ethan met her gaze coolly, but the fire in his eyes was unmistakable. "Oh, it is for you, Karen. You lost." Her lips curled in a sneer as she slammed the trunk shut. Without another word, she sped away, her tires screeching against the pavement. Ethan stood tall, watching her leave, knowing that this was her final act as the HOA leader. As the dust settled, Ethan allowed himself a moment of relief. His land was no longer under her control. His farm had won, and with it, his peace. But deep down, he knew that there would always be another challenge, another Karen to face. For now, though, Ethan smiled to himself. The fight was over, and the Sky Strikers had won the war. The story of Ethan Hawthorne and Karen. Whitmore is a clash between power and freedom, where Karen, the self-appointed leader of the HOA, constantly seeks to control everything around her. As she tries to dominate Ethan's farm, Ethan fights back, proving that freedom and resilience, embodied by his Sky Strikers, a group of territorial geese, can overcome even the most invasive forces. Karen represents the dangers of overreach, where control is the goal and individual rights are trampled. The ultimate victory over Karen's HOA is not just a win for Ethan, but for self-determination and standing against tyranny. Ethan's farm becomes a symbol of resistance, showing that even the smallest stand against HOA, Karen's overbearing authority can create monumental change. In the end, the battle against Karen's HOA shows that no one should let oppressive control dominate their life.